Hey guys, what's up? It's me, People25 here, and today I am doing my top 5 overrated and underrated coasters. Well, that I've ridden, of course, because if I haven't ridden them, I don't have a say in it. Now, what exactly does overrated and underrated mean? Well, this is my prelude, and in the world of coaster enthusiasts, rides will always fall into the categories, or tiers as I'll mention them, where essentially they're sorted by class of how good they are, how quality they are. World class, great, good, average, meh, bad, absolutely terrible. This thing should be torn out absolutely immediately, just to name a few. There's infinite classes. There's some rides in its own class, because people don't know what to think of them. And occasionally, coaster enthusiasts believe that a coaster belong in a different tier than where most other enthusiasts place it. If you think that coaster garnishes too much attention, then more than it's worth, and this should be lower than where most people place it, you consider it overrated, or it gets way too much attention and doesn't frankly deserve it all. However, there are some coasters you think are either like unheard of, unsung heroes, diamonds in the rough, or just better than what people make them out to be, and therefore they're underrated. And there's many more criteria than there is underrated than overrated. Therefore, the underrated list was harder to make. And with I'll be doing 5 coasters for each part of the list: 5 overrated, 5 underrated. I did have to scratch a little bit of the barrel, some of the siding out of it, just to get some of the underrated entries. But overrated was really easy to make because I'm often known for my wild opinions about rides that people consider world class. And I'm not even talking about ones that I rode when I was not even a coaster enthusiast. I'm talking about ones that I rode in the past year. There's some that I really think don't belong in where people say they should be. They might be average, they might only be good rather than world class. And I'll do the overrated list first so we can get the strong emotions out of the way. And whoever stays after to watch the underrated list, good on you. Number 5 is X2. Yeah, this one's only low just because of where the reception has been its entire life. When it was originally X, this thing really wasn't liked as an X, but X2, let's just go off the history of X2. We're going to disregard X in this one. The reception, for as long as the coaster for X2 has been around, has been split. Some people call it really good, some people believe it's absolutely terrible, but me, it's mediocre. It's a gimmick, and it's only enjoyable on half the train. Now, people do counter this ride, or people do defend it being world class by saying in the front row, inside seats, it's world class. My argument, if 2 seats are world class, or 2 seats are better than average out of a 28-seat train, why is the coaster world class when every other outside, like the outside seats, every single one is terrible? Every single outside seat is unenjoyable. And I think the mechanics of the spinning do have to contribute to this coaster's faults. The spinning often feels like a gear. It feels like you're being moved along a gear rather than a circle. It's got like notches. You can feel the whole thing pulsing as you rock back and forth. And all the outside seats are bad just because of that. I rode inside like second or third row because I was already getting tired of waiting in line for ride X2 when I heard it was a terrible ride for my brother. It's not a bad ride, and I do believe it has the potential to be good if it was mechanically sound and used better technology. Unfortunately, it does not accomplish that. And this thing's far from world class. It's not even the best coaster at Magic Mountain by far. Like every single B&M in this park, maybe with the exception of Riddler's Revenge, is better than this thing. It's overrated at the finest. This thing gets so much praise, and I don't really understand why. Even if I ride front row inside seat, I'm gonna have to remember my experiences in the other rows or other seats, just to say, hey, this coaster, world class coasters seem to be good in every seat, even row 4 or row 8 if they're 12-row trains, or friggin' back row. They need to be good everywhere, not just in 2 seats of a 28-seat train. So yeah, there's that. Number 4 is Millennium Force, the most common coaster to appear on an overrated list, and guess what? It appears on mine. The difference? I place it a lot lower than most people do. People often have this at their number 1. People tend to absolutely bash this coaster because it's so overhyped and it doesn't deserve all the hype it gets. Now, I will say, if you've known me, if you've seen my Bonanza series, Millennium Force is my number 2 coaster, though it will likely sink a few places by the end of 2018 due to additions like Steel Vengeance and getting on another ride on Maverick and other things along that, also with an increasing lust for airtime and intensity. I tend to like those forces more than I do just the standard hyper layout, minus a few hometown exceptions. This is a coaster I do have a soft spot for, I will admit. It's enjoyable, re-rideable, but just lacking the things that make a roller coaster outstanding. Mostly G-force, or intensity as people will call it, and airtime. It does have a few good airtime moments, but not like superb ejector airtime you'll find on other coasters. And I will say, you gotta cut this thing some slack. This was the first Giga Coaster. Giga Coaster's connotations often mean that it's going to be a world-class, excellent ride. Both manufacturers' first Gigas were massive screw-ups. Good rides, but not world-class. Leviathan and Millennium Force. And Steel Dragon. All of them were the first manufactured Giga Coasters by their respective manufacturers, and it took them a couple tries to get it right. Intamin made I-305 after this. B&M made freaking Fury after this, and look how popular Fury is. That's on another note, though. This thing just cut us some slack. This was the first ever Giga. First ever coaster full circuit to break 300 feet. Full circuit, I will say. There was, like, Escape from Krypton that came out before this, but that's a pile of trash. And also, another thing that leads to much more over-deserved or undeserved overhype is the Golden Ticket Awards. And I will say the Golden Ticket Awards are not good at ranking coasters. It's a known fact in the coaster community. The Golden Ticket Awards are mostly a GP magazine. And for several years, essentially from like 2005 to 2016, so basically from the time that a later entry got a massive gut by its owners, and Fury 325 started running consistently, this thing won the Golden Ticket Award for first place every year. Even though several other coasters, especially in the later years like Diamondback, Skyrush, Intimidator 305, and even more, easily beat this thing. Well, Diamondback is probably still a little weaker, and like especially with the rise of RMC, Iron Rattler, Texas Giant, Wicked Cyclone, Twisted Colossus, all these other things. More on that later. All these rides that could overthrow Millennium Force. Skyrush in particular, if I haven't mentioned that. People often, almost always in the upper communities, put Skyrush above this thing. And the perfect ranking, the Golden Ticket Awards, the fact that it's at one of the most overhyped parks, though rightfully deserved, one of the most hyped up, well-respected parks, the fact that it's a Giga Coaster, too much hype is generated for it that it ever deserved, really. People just need to go into this thinking it's going to be an above-average ride, not anything that will absolutely blow you away. The best thing you do is go 92 miles an hour in the front row and have a pretty steep drop, and maybe a couple moments of good airtime, like floater airtime. Other than that, this thing's just, it's okay. I still love this thing, though. Don't get me wrong. Number 2 is no honor to be taken with a laughing manner. And you know how I mentioned RMC earlier? This is the first RMC to make the list. For overrated, we have Twisted Colossus, the best coaster of Six Flags Magic Mountain. It doesn't say much, because Magic Mountain, their entire lineup, is under par. Though they have 19 coasters, none of them are world class. Now, this thing, in theory, has a lot of potential to be good. And in theoretical models, and perfect operations, and alternate universes where this thing duels all the time, which it doesn't in this world. It duels about 5% of the time in this world. I never got a dueling ride on this, so I might just be salty. But a perfect world, this thing would duel every time. The trains would be the wheels would be polyurethane, and the thing would just constantly be racing each other. The dispatch would be perfect, and the chain lifts would be well synchronized with each other, giving it a true sensation of racing. It doesn't happen. It's Six Flags. This is Six Flags we're talking about. With pretty much everything they do, they find a way to massively screw it up. And we're left with a Mobius Loop wannabe that just has all the potential that it once had, leached out of it to where you just have an RMC, very short-circuited. It's basically 2 very short-circuit, circular, like oval-shaped RMCs with a couple decent elements when synced together. With separated by 2 painfully slow lift hills, and just nothing good comes out of it. When it's dueling, it's an actual great coaster, from what I've heard. I would love to get a dueling ride on this thing, but I'd probably have to come back multiple times to get actually dueling on or a ride on this. Maybe they're gonna go for the 2018 New Year, New Mountain, because January's almost over. You got to keep going on that. Come on, New Year, New Mountain. Make this thing duel almost every time. And also, the SoCal crowds in amusement parks are notoriously slow in boarding. That's another factor. But yeah, let's talk about the ride itself. I want to go through the layout real quickly. You go up a pretty decently paced blue lift hill. The blue lift hill is meant to get you to the top quickest so you can get your first go at this thing. Drop down, bank a little bit to the right, go up over an airtime hill, which is not nearly as good considering it's a speed hill. You don't get too much airtime on it. There's a bigger airtime moment later in the ride. You go over an overbank. You You bank left 90 degrees the first time, then right 90 degrees the second time, go down in either a double down or just a straight down into either an airtime hill or an inversion. And you do the same for like 2 different sessions, and then you basically just circuit back around, go up a even slower green lift hill, which easily takes as long as, well, easily a minute to get up to the top of the green lift hill. Do essentially the same thing with just all the hype sucked out of you from a boringly long and slow lift hill in the SoCal heat. So, riding this thing in January, maybe? Try avoiding the rain, but SoCal Januaries, this would be the best ride so you don't bake while you're on the second lift hill? Maybe I got a decent job ahead of me. So, yeah. Twisted Colossus, it really isn't that good. And the sensation of dueling alone would make this thing a lot better than what it already is. But I'm a realist. Knowing that this thing does not duel almost ever, you're an extremely lucky person to get a dueling ride on this thing. This thing is way overhyped. And personally, I find other RMCs better than this. I would even find RMCs like Storm Chaser and maybe even New Texas Giant better than this thing. This is a severely low-class RMC to me, considering how much potential it had and how little it delivers. And not to mention, this thing also uses the nylon wheels more or less, or the steel wheels. So it's a little bit bumpier than every other RMC I've ridden. And I've been on 3 other RMCs, including the one at my home park, Goliath, which just because it's a little underwhelming itself, this thing barely edges out Goliath. But Wicked Cyclone and Iron Rattler kick this thing out of the park every time. They can't compete. Moving on to number 2, we have Superman the Ride at Six Flags New England, an award-winning coaster where Six Flags screws it up yet again. In 2005, roughly, they put on onboard audio. Now, before then, it was built in 2000. It had those lightweight T-bars that Millennium Force had, and it was vastly superior in every way, except for height and speed. The airtime was absolutely incredible on this thing in 2000, until they put those Bizarro trains on it. Onboard audio that didn't work, and the worst lap bars that I've pretty much ever experienced in my life. You basically get stapled every time. Even gravity doesn't like you on this ride because you get stapled by gravity. You not mention the ride ops No, the ride ops sometimes staple you, but gravity does it itself usually because it's so freaking heavy. They're uncomfortable. There's no room for your legs. Your circulation being cut off, and all the airtime. It's just the negative G's are on the freaking restraint, and it doesn't budge. You're getting about a quarter of the airtime you would with the regular T-bars. Like, why they had to change it is beyond me. What did they do? What was the justification for getting rid of these T-bars that made the ride world-class? There's an old saying that says, you don't know what you really had until you lose it. Or you're not thankful for what you had until you lose it. And those T-bars on Superman the Ride from 2000 to roughly 2005, or whenever they put Bizarro on, I could be completely wrong because I'm not a historian of Six Flags New England. I got other parks to study. Let's just say this thing was so good, and they screwed it up so bad. And when they brought it back to Superman the Ride, they kept the Bizarro trains. What are you thinking? You don't need to have onboard audio. You just took the existing train and repainted it instead of taking the ones out of the shed from 12 years ago. What are you doing? So ever since they ditched the lightweight T-bars, and more coasters have been opening in the United States, even Diamondback surpassing it as the best hyper in the nation, and a significantly better coaster, and in the same park opening in 2015, this thing has fallen far out of favor, out of world class. And just the bigger they are, the harder they fall. And this thing was a fall faster than free fall itself. It's just saddening and sickening. And number 1 is the most predictable thing you could have predicted from me. You know, repetition is good, because my statement is unoriginal. Yeah, disregard what I said there. Longtime viewers should have known this thing was going to be number 1 instantly. This is the beast at Kings Island. If you're new, or if you've avoided videos on my channel regarding coaster rankings or Kings Island in general, you got a long one. This ride gets way too much hype, even for being an excellent night ride. Which I've experienced this ride at sunset, and yeah, this thing isn't even that good at sunset. There's so many things I can't get over with this ride, and there's so many bad things you can't excuse with this thing. First, the lift hill. The lift hill is painfully slow. The first one takes easily a minute and a half, 2 minutes to get up, and you're not even going... There are taller coasters in the park that scale the lift hill faster. There are wooden coasters that scale the lift hill faster at the same height, or even a bigger height. Son of Beast probably scaled the lift hill faster than this thing. It was just this lift hill is so painfully slow. You can see insects crawl on the supports or flying in the air near you, going past you at a blistering speed. Like there are beetles or ladybugs or something like that crawling on the support structure on the side that are walking faster than you're moving up the hill. It's just that bad. It might be a little exaggerated, but that's bad. So once you make it to the top of the lift hill and you are baking in the Cincinnati July heat, because that's like when you're visiting, or you're a little chilly, or just bored because you're in maybe the fall during Halloween Horror Nights or Halloween weekends or whatever it's called here at Kings Island, you go down a drop. What does that drop have? A trim brake. Why? This thing's supposed to be an out-of-control roller coaster in the woods, and you put a trim brake on the drop. It's not even 150 feet, and you put a trim brake on the drop. Why? And you feel it as well. You feel that you're not falling at free fall. You're in a controlled free fall that is going less than a 9.8 freaking gravitational acceleration. Why? And after that, doesn't even get any better. You're at a decent speed, I will say. But you're going over a completely straight layout that may turn left or right a few times, may dip down a little bit with the terrain. Notice the lack of support structure. You're just basically riding, going forward with a very little elevation change, very little G-force or negative Gs. The absence of airtime is a serious problem on this ride. But this thing would have worked for major coaster enthusiasts in the 1970s. This would be world-class in the 1970s and 80s. But when airtime started becoming more and more of a physical reality on coasters, this thing became obsolete quick. So what happens when you're just done going through a boring layout where you're just doing a couple turns that aren't even banked or not even overbanked or, well, not even banked in general. You're barely banking on those, less than 20 degrees. You go to another lift hill. Thankfully, this one's faster. I will give it that. It is faster. You definitely feel like you're going faster on this lift hill, so the ride's going to be over quicker. Then you go down a curved drop, not banked, into a helix, barely even banked. That's a rough helix as well, because you're turning, not banked, therefore physics is not in your favor. The helix is enclosed, so the tunnel makes a nice aspect, but you're just going in a helix where you're just being jostled around. It's just not fun. I don't know. This thing is just way overhyped. And people who've known me for a long time, or watched my videos for a long time, should know that the Beast is way overhyped in my opinion. Like, it is the single most overrated coaster that I've been on, and probably ever will be on. Unless I ride Terran and then somehow don't find the reason people like it. Now, when am I actually going to get the Terran? Knowing my luck, the park will close before I even get to Germany. And on that note, we're going to move on to the underrated coasters. This is going to go a little quicker. Number 5 is Wicked Cyclone. Now, the first two entries are a little bit of barrel scraping. This one, I do believe, is just underrated by people. Not that it's a bad ride or a hidden gem. People know this thing's going to be good. But it's just a little underrated by the people. People often place it for being mid-tier RMC, when this thing easily is in the top 5 prior to the class of 2018, which is Twisted Timbers, Steel Vengeance, and Twisted Cyclone. So, during 2017, this thing was easily in the top 5, maybe even top 3 along... But the top 3 was like Iron Rattler, freaking Lightning Rod, and Wildfire, if it even opened. But disregarding Wildfire, this thing would probably take the number 3 spot. The airtime is relentless. The pace is so fast. You're going through elements one after another with no pause. The kinetic energy is strong nearly the entire way through. It does slow down towards the end, but you still feel the forces despite the loss of kinetic energy. And just the experience is absolutely incredible, and easily the best ride at the park. Well, they took a useless old Din Woody that nobody liked and turned it into this masterpiece. And it actually has okay theming. There's some flybys, there's some stalls, the airtime is great, you're flying past some stuff. The station is pretty nice to look at if you're waiting there. This thing's so good. People misjudge how good this thing is. Number 4 is Storm Runner. Now, this is probably one of the best intimate accelerator coasters around, disregarding, well, at least within the 100 to 200 foot threshold. I'm not counting the Strata coasters with this ranking, but I think this thing could easily be one of the best intimate accelerators. Even better than Accelerator, Saturn, Stealth, maybe even iSpeed, other things like that. It's essentially a hybrid between an intimate accelerator with the launch and top hat at start, and an intimate blitz with the high-paced, high-speed, and aggressive elements. So, This thing has a good ejector airtime at the crest because the airtime, the kinetic energy is left over, so you carry over some of that to negative Gs. You dive down, go into what is essentially a half cobra roll into a flying snake dive, which is a heartline roll into a heartline roll into like a dive loop, or heartline roll into a half heartline roll into a dive loop, and then you go back over yourself and back up the ride and get some good double ups, triple ups, quadruple ups, whatever it might be. This thing has some amazing elements, all at such high velocities and really good intensity. Also, I'm praising this ride so much before it got the soft strap harnesses in 2016, because I rode this in 2015. With my increased taste in coasters and the new soft strap harnesses, this thing could easily be the underdog of my top 10. Stormrunner is so good. It's essentially right now in its soft strap harness state. It's better than Accelerator and even comes close to knocking out Skyrush for me. Or at least if I rerode Skyrush. This thing even currently beats Skyrush, but I gotta ride it again because I haven't been there in 3 years now. Or 2.5. It'll be 3 during the summer. With Stormrunner, it's good. This thing is real good. Also, dual loading station. Efficiency? There's barely a line for this thing often. It's just, people love it, but they get through so quickly. Unlike Fahrenheit and Skyrush, which have a really long line consistently. This thing's decent capacity. Dual loading. It's good stuff. Number 3 is Screamin Eagle of the Underrated, the hidden gem that is tucked away in a game corner of a neglected Six Flags St. Louis. Pretty much, this is the best coaster in the park. I'm going to think, if I go back to Six Flags St. Louis, which I haven't been to in about 2.5 years, went during the same year as Hershey Park, 2015. If I rode this again and rode everything there back to back, I'd probably like this thing the best. Even more than American Thunder, even more than Mr. Freeze. Because this thing is absolutely wonderful. I love this ride. A front row experience, or even any row. Front row, consistent and smooth airtime. Back row, a complete madness, ejector airtime, and an uncontrollable classic wooden coaster experience. Even like a decade ago, there were reports that this thing came off the track in the back row because the airtime was that strong. I'm not kidding. This is one of the best old school wooden coasters I've been on. And still, if I reload it, probably one of the best wooden coasters I've been on, period. This thing could even beat some GCIs. Even some of the good ones. Not like the Roar and Wildcat bad ones. This thing could beat some of the weaker GCIs. Which is how forceful this thing is. Not with G-force, but with negative Gs. Technically G-force, but the absence of them. You are flying out of your seat the whole time. This thing's still smooth as ever. I can imagine this thing being smooth as it was in 1980 or whatever this thing opened in. I don't even know. I don't study Six Flags over Mid-America. This thing is just a diamond in the rough, a hidden gem, and the one coaster that genuinely impressed me for how it looked compared to how it rode. Also, a walk-on front row ride was also a nice thing. I've only gotten that on one other coaster, and that one is nowhere near as good as this. Number 2 is Renegade. Now, people need to get to Valley Fair and ride this thing. Stat, please. They need to talk about this. They need to know about this. This ride is absolutely amazing. The single most impressive coaster that I've ridden in 2017. Mostly due to the moderate standards I imposed. Look at some of the other coasters I rode the year. Mystic Timbers. High standards, blew them away. Ghost Rider, another GCI. High standards, disappointed. Apocalypse. Moderate standards, met those moderate standards and maybe went past them a little bit. Renegade, my first GCI of 2017. Moderate standards, extraordinary ride experience. Only Mystic Timbers is the only other wooden coaster, non-RMC, that beats this thing. I would visit Valley Fair just to ride this over and over again. The S-shape drop is quick, goes down very quickly, good acceleration, and great lateral Gs. The pace is relentless, the airtime's non-stop, and it's smooth as ever in the front row. The back row is a little joggy, but the front row, or towards the front, is very smooth, even after 10 plus seasons of operation. I believe this thing opened in 2006, 2007, 2008, one of those 2 years, or one of those 3. This is GCI's hidden gem, because people don't go to Minnesota to ride coasters often. Minnesota is often seen as a lower coaster state. But this is a reason to come out and go to Minnesota. That and the 9 acres of wetlands they have back there they can put a nice B&M in. People talk about Mystic Timbers, Gold Striker. But Renegade, maybe with the exception of those two, is single-handedly beats 75 other GCIs in the world. Like, I've seen layouts stronger, but this thing just delivers. This thing is above American Thunder, above Apocalypse, and even above Ghost Rider, a generally overhyped coaster that barely missed the list for overrated. And number one, I'm going to make quick because you've already heard about this 3 times in the past months, it's Raging Bull. It returns yet again. Another Peak Motor 25 patented, well, patent pending, Raging Bull rant. This is a hometown hero, and basically the mascot coaster for my life that will never cease to amaze me. So much undeserved smack is given to this ride, and people call it the worst hyper, people call it weak, people call it the third best coaster in the park behind Batman sometimes. This thing is absolutely amazing. A back row ride, or front row and middle rows are good enough, but if people climb in the back row with all their friends, or people climb in the back row even alone, and are ready for a ride, their expectations are usually low, and it blows them away. The back row drop, as people should know, considering I have a lot of Great America crowd in my subscriber fan base, is one of the single most re-rideable and shamelessly enjoyable things in the entire coaster community. Like, in the Midwest, it's the single most re-rideable coaster around. Especially in the back row. Back row Raging Bull, you can marathon for hours and still never get sick of it. People talk so much smack, but then they realize it's good. This is the bullied kid coaster. This is a bullied coaster with far more potential than people realize, even though its structure is set in steel. Pun intended. And just everything in this coaster functions well. I will admit the trim brake does ruin the ride a little bit. If the trim brake was turned off, this thing would be even better. But for Illinois or even Midwestern coaster enthusiasts, this ride is absolutely fantastic and one of the most impressive freestanding structures within 5 hours of the park. This thing has more value than some of the skyscrapers put up in Chicago. This is just an absolutely wonderful contraption here. Raging Bull, I mean, people might talk so much crap about you. You always have my heart, you always have my loyalty, and you'll always have my ride. So, if you guys have enjoyed this video, feel free to leave a like, comment, or subscription. I hope you guys have a great insert unit time here, and as always,